Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, Anthony Richardson, Bijan Robinson, Jahmyr Gibbs, Jahmyr freaking Gibbs, Jaxon Smith-Njigba, Zay Flowers, Quentin Johnston, and Jordan Addison. What do all these players have in common? They are going to be drafted pretty highly in fantasy football dynasty startup drafts, dynasty rookie drafts, and they all just went in the first round. Now notice there was one name off that list that I simply did not mention, Will Levis. Today, I'm going to be talking about all those players, my instant reactions to everyone and where they went in the draft. But before we get into it, guys, if you guys could, go down and give this video a like. I am answering every single comment. If you guys have any questions related to fantasy football, let me know down below. And subscribe to the channel. Turn that notification bell on so you don't miss another video. It is the #1 way to support me. It's totally free, and you can always change your mind later. With that, though, guys, let's roll the intro music.
Where Keenum's going to try to work the ball on the boundary.
Alright, so I will go in order of a #1 pick all the way down to the last offensive player taken. And I'll start with Bryce Young. Really no surprise to anyone who was looking at draft odds, draft order, anything like that. Bryce Young to the Panthers makes the most sense. He is the most pro-ready quarterback, so I think if you are looking for somebody with a nice stable floor, Bryce Young is a nice piece to draft in dynasty rookie drafts, especially in 2 quarterback leagues, because he brings so much stability to the position. There isn't really great upside. I mean, the wide receiving core is pretty bad. You got Adam Thielen, DJ Chark, nobody really to write home about, but it's a fine situation. They have a nice defense, a good offensive line. You can't really go wrong with Bryce Young. Not really too much to say about it. Either way, let's move on to the next pick, and that is the Houston Texans. And after all the smoke the Texans were putting out about Will Levis, with Will Levis being the favorite to go #2 in the draft, with Will Anderson Jr. mixing in as well, CJ Stroud was not expected to go to the Texans, and although I think a lot of draft analysts thought he would, especially because of his film, I mean, he's just simply such a good quarterback, I think there was a lot of doubt in people's minds with things like the S2 cognition test, and simply just Las Vegas draft odds for Will Levis to go there. I mean, it really makes no sense to me, but now let's evaluate the situation. I think, first of all, this is not really the greatest situation for a quarterback to find themselves in. I mean, I think their O-line is decent, and they have an okay run game with Dameon Pierce and Devin Singletary, but it's really nothing great. I think this does bump Dameon Pierce's value, though, simply because Dameon Pierce now has a more stable quarterback than Davis Mills. Davis Mills, not somebody to write home about, but the #1 player that I think this boosts by far the most is John Metchie. I mean, first of all, right now, their depth chart is one of the most desolate in the entire league. I mean, you have Robert Woods, Nico Collins, and Noah Brown as your starting 3 wide receivers. Now, recently, as I think it was 2 or 3 days ago, John Metchie is returning to workouts on the field, which is phenomenal news, first of all, from a health standpoint, because he was dealing with leukemia for the longest time. Now, finally back on the field, I think he could easily win Comeback Player of the Year this year. But 2, I mean, this is somebody with a good draft capital going in the middle of the second round, a player that the Texans traded up to get. And now the Texans don't bring anyone else in the first round. I mean, we see them trade up to get Will Anderson Jr., which, by the way, crazy move. Not something I'm going to talk about in this video much, just because it's fantasy football. But either way, absolutely wild move. So they don't bring in another wide receiver in the first round. Yes, they could easily address the wide receiver position later on in the draft, but they did trade away their second round pick in the pursuit of Will Anderson. So they don't have a second round pick, meaning they probably will be rolling out with some form of Robert Woods, Nico Collins, and John Metchie at wide receiver, which, if that's happening, John Metchie is the most talented out of those guys, at least at this current point in their career. At one point, probably Robert Woods, but John Metchie should be able to get significant play time and has a great quarterback in CJ Stroud, somebody with a very high floor, maybe not the highest ceiling, but again, that is absolutely fine. I think this raises John Metchie's stock by far the most. Let's move on, though, to the first real surprise in the draft, and that is the Colts at 4 taking Anthony Richardson. And I think Anthony Richardson, a very interesting player. I think this is a great landing spot for a quarterback because, for one, their O-line, well, it did disappoint last year, is a fine offensive line. You also have a pretty good running back in Jonathan Taylor. I mean, nothing crazy. He's all right. Just kidding. But Jonathan Taylor, phenomenal running back, one of the best running backs in the league. And you do have Michael Pittman, Alec Pierce, who are fine wide receivers. Not something you're going to write home about. But when you're going top 5, the wide receivers are usually pretty bad. I mean, look at the Panthers, look at the Texans. The Colts' situation is significantly better than both of those. So, my main takeaway from Anthony Richardson going to the Colts is that this, for one, proves that Anthony Richardson is going to be getting at least 1 or 2 years of starting time in the NFL. Whether or not he's a good quarterback is anyone's best guess. But going top 5 in the draft, I mean, you are guaranteed the starting job at the NFL level, at least for a certain period of time. They probably will go into the season starting Minshew, but eventually Anthony Richardson will be the player for the Colts. That is almost 100% guaranteed when you have top 5 draft capital, and I think this could honestly propel Anthony Richardson to be the number 1 quarterback in Dynasty rookie drafts. I know a lot of people like the stability of Bryce Young and CJ Stroud, especially in 2 quarterback leagues, because stability does matter a lot more at the position, but in my opinion, Anthony Richardson has the ability to be a top 5 quarterback in fantasy football almost right away through his rushing. I mean, look at a guy like Justin Fields, look at a guy like Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson. All of these guys put up tons of fantasy points right away early on into their careers simply because they do have the rushing upside. Anthony Richardson fits this mold to a T, perhaps even more so because normally when he is out of the pocket, he's just running the football. He's not looking downfield. Even if he is looking downfield, though, that's also a good thing. Buys you more time. I think Anthony Richardson, a great pick here and somebody who now will be skyrocketing up almost everyone's boards going top 5. To talk about the other players in the offense real quick, I think that this does lower Michael Pittman and Alec Pierce just a little bit because, first of all, Gardner Minshew is going to be starting for part of the season, and Gardner Minshew, while a fine quarterback, is nothing special, probably in the same type of mold as a Matt Ryan, as a Carson Wentz. But even when they do bring in Anthony Richardson, I don't think Anthony Richardson is going to average very high passing numbers at the NFL level, at least especially right away, and that does concern me. Bringing in a rookie quarterback for these guys isn't really the greatest thing when the floor is so low for a guy like Anthony Richardson. With CJ Stroud, with Bryce Young, it's a little different because the floor is so much higher. I am a little bit concerned for the wide receivers, but I'm also a little bit concerned for Jonathan Taylor. While Jonathan Taylor is still a phenomenal running back, he will take a little bit of a dip in terms of his receiving production. I mean that is almost for sure. Considering in 2021, his breakout season, his 2,000 all-purpose yard season, he had 51 targets. That is not coming back with Anthony Richardson as their quarterback. Yes, he will still check it down. It is Jonathan Taylor. He will still get his. But I think this does limit his overall upside for receiving volume. And not only that, I think this does lower Jonathan Taylor's overall upside in the end zone. I mean, we are almost for sure going to see Jonathan Taylor getting less red zone touches because Anthony Richardson will at least have 4 or 5 touchdowns in the red zone this upcoming season with his legs. And so I think that does concern me. Not only that, with the rookie quarterback, you probably are going to have less overall touchdowns in this offense. So I do think this lowers Jonathan Taylor's stock quite a bit. Either way, let me know what you guys think about that down below. Let me know what you guys think about Anthony Richardson down below, because absolutely crazy pick. Either way, though, let's move it down to number 8. The Atlanta Falcons taking Bijan Robinson. And I had a thought that they were going to take Bijan Robinson early, but still surprising when you see it. I mean, Bijan Robinson, a phenomenal running back in all rights, a blue chip prospect, a top 5 player in this draft. And yet he goes at 8 because the running back position not as needed as some other positions, but we do see him go in the top 10, which is phenomenal for Bijan Robinson. Very, very happy to see it, especially considering he does land himself on what I consider to be a pretty good landing spot for him. I think the Falcons are a great run-first offense. I mean, we've seen what Arthur Smith likes to do. Tyler Algier, despite not starting for part of the season, due to the fact that they did have Cordarrelle Patterson, and he still was able to have 1,000 yards on only 200 carries. That's very efficient metrics, and Bijan Robinson is simply a better running back than Tyler Algier. Bijan went 8th overall, which is extremely high draft capital for a running back. I'll get into the whole draft capital thing in a minute. I think you guys know where I'm going to go with this with Jahmyr Gibbs. But either way, we see Bijan Robinson go to an offense that they're going to be running the ball a ton. And yes, the quarterback is not going to be that great in Desmond Ridder, but he's somebody who can potentially check it down at least a little bit to Bijan Robinson. Well, this isn't a dream destination by any means. This is no Chargers. This is no Bengals. Better than a lot of other teams that will potentially split him in the backfield. Guys like teams like the Patriots, teams like the Seahawks. So I'm absolutely fine with this landing spot as a future Bijan Robinson owner in Dynasty. Moving on, though, I have the number 1 story of the draft, and that should be clear to everyone. Jahmyr Gibbs going at pick 12. Wow. This is absolutely the craziest story on draft night. This is the moment that makes you think, oh my God, it's draft day. Did that really just happen? And yes, the Lions do take Jahmyr Gibbs over at pick 12. It's funny, this pick was traded 3 total times from Cleveland to Houston, from Houston to Arizona, and then Arizona to Detroit on draft night. Crazy, crazy story, crazy, crazy pick. I mean, I don't think anyone was expecting Jahmyr Gibbs to go this high. I had him pinned as a late first, early second round prospect, which would have been absolutely fine for him. Instead, now he goes 12, and now I can talk about this crazy draft capital. In the last 10 years, take a guess at how many running backs have gotten top 15 draft capital in the last 10 years, 2013 to 2023. Take a guess. Let me know down below what you guys think. Take a guess. Give you a second. The answer is 5. 5 running backs in the last 10 years. That is a running back every other year. We got Saquon Barkley. We got Todd Gurley. We got Melvin Gordon. We got Leonard Fournette. And we have Ezekiel Elliott. That is it. All of those guys, phenomenal names. And then, of course, we have Bijan Robinson as well. So I guess it is 6. My mistake. But either way, I mean, this is phenomenal draft capital for a running back to get, and draft capital that running backs seldom ever get, especially at this point in the NFL. I'm sure they were probably hoping for Bijan. They probably traded down, assuming Bijan would be there at 12. Didn't happen. The Falcons ended up pulling trigger on him. But I think this is easily the craziest draft pick. But it also, I think, is a much better landing spot than people are giving this credit for. I mean, for one, you have a top offensive line. I mean, where do I even begin? I guess I'll start with the offensive line. Top 5 in the entire league. It is a great line. Not only that, yes, you do have David Montgomery and DeAndre Swift in this offense, but I think it's almost a guarantee at this point that DeAndre Swift gets traded. And we've seen how they were able to utilize 2 running backs last season with Jamal Williams and DeAndre Swift both being fantasy relevant at times. I think that this is going to be that type of offense on steroids. I think that Jahmyr Gibbs will be the running back 1 in this offense, almost guaranteed. You don't spend the 12th pick on a running back not to have him be the RB1. And I think Jahmyr Gibbs will get a little bit of work as a wide receiver as well, especially with Jameson Williams suspended for the first 6 games of the season. Not only that, I think the most valid point of them all, we've seen Jared Goff support phenomenal, absolutely insane fantasy football running back seasons. I mean, just look at how successful Todd Gurley was. Look at how successful Jamal Williams was last season. He has consistently been able to support running backs to above average NFL seasons, and that's why I think Jahmyr Gibbs is in such a good situation, a situation that not that many people are giving him credit for. This is certainly not a bad landing spot. This is certainly not the Patriots. This is certainly not the Seahawks. There were way, way, way worse landing spots than Detroit, and I think it's going to be just fine for him, especially with the fact that they pick him 12th overall. If they picked him 34th, different story, it would be an interesting landing spot, but the fact that they pick him at 12, I think there is a really interesting debate to potentially take him as high as the 102 in Dynasty rookie drafts, in 1 quarterback drafts, of course, not 2 quarterbacks. Either way, though, I think Jahmyr Gibbs was crazy. Let me know what you think about that down below, because that is easily the craziest story of draft night so far. Either way, though, let's move on to our next player, and that, of course, is Jaxon Smith-Njigba. And Jaxon Smith-Njigba lands in a pretty interesting landing spot with the Seahawks. I think that it's better than a lot of people are giving it credit for, but it's not the best landing spot. I mean, first of all, you have Geno Smith, a good quarterback, but somebody who was only signed to a 3-year deal, so you don't know what the situation is going to be like really long term, and Geno Smith has only done it for 1 season. We don't know how consistent Geno Smith is going to be in the long term, so I think that Jaxon Smith-Njigba is honestly going to be one of the best wide receivers in this draft class, if not the best wide receiver in this draft class. I just am a little bit concerned with the quarterback situation there in the short term and the long term, because we've seen Geno Smith for so long be a pretty bad NFL quarterback. Now all of a sudden comes on it and is great. Yes, I'm rooting for Geno, but I'm not saying it's 100% at this point. There are some question marks. Their O-line is better. They do have DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. And, well, a lot of people are probably worried about Tyler Lockett. I'm here to tell you shouldn't be. He is 30 years old, about to be 31 by the time the NFL season starts. His birthday is in September, so he'll be 31 by the time the season starts. And once you hit 31 years old as a wide receiver, you start to age out a little bit, and I think the combination long-term of DK Metcalf being that alpha wide receiver 1, stretch it downfield type of wide receiver, and Jaxon Smith-Njigba as that wide receiver 2, that slot guy, that Amon-Ra St. Brown type of player is awesome to have at the position, and I think a duo that will be one of the most formidable duos right away in football. Probably behind the teams you're thinking of, the Vikings, the Dolphins, the Bengals, etc. But, I mean, this is going to be one of the most formidable wide receiver duos for years to come. I think it's a good pick. I think it's a good landing spot, but it's not the optimal landing spot. I mean, if he had fallen 1 spot lower, that would have been the best landing spot, in my personal opinion. Either way, though, I think a good landing spot for JSN, and I think you could justify taking him at the 102 or the 103 either way in one quarterback leagues at least. I think between him and Jahmyr Gibbs, it is going to be a debate that's going to haunt people until draft day. Moving on, though, to the next player, and it is Quentin Johnston going to the Chargers, and I think this is another really interesting landing spot. I know in the short term, people are going to look at this and be, oh my God, they have Keenan Allen. Oh my God, they have Mike Williams. What are they doing drafting another wide receiver? But honestly, I think this is a really phenomenal landing spot for Quentin Johnston. I mean, this is somebody who fits the scheme, I think, better than a lot of people are giving him credit for. They're calling him a duplicate of Mike Williams. That is just not true. Yes, they are big body wide receivers, but Quentin Johnston has the speed that Mike Williams simply doesn't. And this Chargers offense has needed speed for years now, ever since Justin Herbert has gone to the team. I think they will elect to keep one of these two, but they're not going to elect to keep both of these two. I think Quentin Johnston, a really, really good scheme fit, somebody who can stretch the field downfield, but also could just be a great blanket wide receiver for Justin Herbert, a guy who we know could easily have 5,000 yards in a season, as he's done before. So I think this is pretty much the optimal landing spot for any wide receiver, aside from a team like the Chiefs. And so I think Quentin Johnston finds himself in arguably the best situation out of any wide receiver in this draft class. And that's why now, in my personal opinion, he is my wide receiver 2 behind Jaxon Smith-Njigba. And while you could justify him as high as 1, I think Jaxon Smith-Njigba's talent is simply too high. His production simply too high. There are really no question marks with JSN. Moving on, though, we do have Zay Flowers going to the Ravens. This is in the draft order. He is not my number 3 wide receiver, however. That will go to Jordan Addison, who I will talk about in a second. Either way, though, Ravens getting Zay Flowers, I think this is good because this is a wide receiver core that's pretty desolate. I mean, yes, you have Rashad Bateman. Now you add Odell Beckham Jr., but at the end of the day, realistically, who cares? Zay Flowers is somebody you can get open on a dime at the drop of a hat. He is a phenomenal route runner, somebody who I think will fit in pretty well to this offense, especially because he is a nice vertical threat. I think Lamar's deep ball is his best trait outside of his pure rushing ability, and so I think this does actually fit Zay Flowers really well from a scheme perspective. Well, he is not my wide receiver 3. I think he is my wide receiver 4 now in a tier completely of his own. I think that is fine, and I think something that is completely deserved for Zay Flowers, especially now getting first-round draft pedigree. Yes, he is somebody who stayed all 4 years of college, but he's also somebody who broke out in year 2, decided to stay at Boston College despite getting NIL money elsewhere. And so I think Zay Flowers, a good wide receiver, somebody you might be able to get at a value because he's not exactly a name brand like a Jordan Addison, like a Quentin Johnston, like a Jaxon Smith-Njigba. Love the landing spot overall. Maybe a little bit of a shock that he went over Jordan Addison, but I think when you examine the scheme, it does make a little bit of sense. Although I personally would have gone Jordan Addison, and now that's who I'm going to talk about. Jordan Addison going to the Vikings. I think this is a receiver that a lot of people are going to be off of now that he's on the Vikings. Looking at this team, oh my God, they have Justin Jefferson, a phenomenal wide receiver, somebody who's going to have 1,800 yards. But we've seen this offense actually hyper-target 2 wide receivers for the last couple of years now, and only last year had that changed. Adam Thielen, perennially a 1,000-yard wide receiver. And if Jordan Addison can be that 1,000, 1,100-yard type of wide receiver in this offense, I think that is absolutely fine. Not only that, I think this last year was a little different because you do have the emergence of KJ Osborne, a lot more 3 wide receiver sets, and KJ Osborne actually having the 10th most routes in all of football and not really doing too much with it, 650 yards, but then you add those 2 yards together, Adam Thielen having over 700 yards, and KJ Osborne having over 600 yards. That's 1,300 yards right there that could easily go to a much better wide receiver at this point than both of those 2 players. Yes, you have TJ Hawkinson as well, but this is a quarterback in Kirk Cousins whose passing floor these last 3 seasons was 4,200 yards and 29 touchdowns. He's going to be throwing a lot of touchdowns. He's going to be throwing for a lot of yards. This is a team that may lose Dalvin Cook, and they may like to pass even more, and they just draft Jordan Addison in the first round. I think it's a no-brainer for Jordan Addison to still be the wide receiver 3, potentially even wide receiver 2, in the same tier as Quentin Johnston. But either way, that's all the offensive players gone in the first round. I just want to take a second to talk about Will Levis, and this is somebody who I was drafting a ton of in Underdog Fantasy simply because the draft capital projected was so high. Now that he's fallen out of the first round, I don't think he's worth drafting at all in the first round of Dynasty 2 quarterback rookie drafts. I don't think he's worth owning in the slightest. Do not go out and draft him anymore. He's somebody who's now on my do not buy list. Do not buy him. Draft capital is everything at the quarterback position. He goes from a player who is almost guaranteed 2 years of starting caliber play in an offense if he goes top 5 to now, potentially not even starting a single game at the NFL level. I mean, look at a guy like Malik Willis starting 1 game last year. Yes, you could point to Russell Wilson's, but I can point you to 10 Drew Locks in the other direction. Either way, guys, that's going to be it from me. Hope you did enjoy the video. If you did, go down and give this video a like. I'm answering every single comment, and subscribe. It is the #1 way to support me. Totally free, and you can always change your mind later. With that, though, guys, as always, have a good day, a good night, and a good life.